The Meat You Eat, Ethics and Public Policy. We've all heard the horror stories and seen the pictures of cruel animal treatment in factory farms. It isn't news that animals are not treated well during their lives on industrialized animal farms. What many people don't realize is that not only is most meat consumption cruel toward animals, but it is also one of the leading causes of climate change. Raising livestock is responsible for more greenhouse gas emissions than all of the world's vehicles and is responsible for at least 37% of all human-induced methane, which is 86 times more destructive than human-induced carbon dioxide. Additionally, livestock production has caused extremely large amounts of deforestation, including 91% of Amazon rainforest destruction. According to the Food and Agriculture Organization, livestock occupy 30% of the Earth's land surface, which is equal to 45% of ice-free land, and they use 30% of the consumed water on Earth. Livestock also consume up to 50% of the world's grain, most of which is genetically modified and monocropped. And yet, the number of people who go hungry every day is almost 1 billion. These facts raise the question, why has nothing been done, and who is responsible to act? When we answer these questions, it becomes clear that in order to mitigate the impacts of climate change, it is necessary for individuals who have a collective responsibility to reduce their consumption of meat. This can only be achieved by the reframing of the issue and the individual realization of responsibility for the current consequences of climate change and the responsibility to act. The main ethical approach to this issue is one of framing. Just as we have no politics of climate change, as Giddens points out, we have no politics of meat consumption, no developed analysis of changes that must be made in order to limit our effects on the planet by decreasing meat consumption. This requires a new framing of the issue as an influential individual choice that can have a positive impact, rather than a criticism of a lifestyle that must be altered in response to fear. My approach to this ethical issue is to utilize a new method of framing and epistemology to change people's behaviors, not to frighten them into action or vilify their beliefs, but to deny the epistemic belief that individual action cannot make a global difference. Based on this conception, the argument for decreasing or ceasing meat consumption becomes an ethical one that must be addressed. In order to determine how we should act, it is important to first define who we are. In John Dewey's The Public and Its Problems, he states, "The public consists of all those who are affected by the indirect consequences of transactions to such an extent that it is deemed necessary to have those consequences systematically cared for." When examining this idea in terms of meat consumption, it is clear that the public would then be all people who live on the planet, because everyone is affected by the consequences of the acts of others. Defining the public as all people on Earth requires that all people on Earth have responsibility to, as Dewey puts it, systematically care for the consequences of eating meat. This responsibility is collective because it comes from political relationships, as Ashford puts it. The issue of meat consumption is concerned with power and the just use of power by the government and by corporations. This responsibility requires collective action upon the part of all people in order to change the structural injustices that allow the meat industry to continue operating. Although the responsibility is collective, there is an aspect of it that is common but differentiated. For example, a wealthy American has a greater capacity to buy tofu from Whole Foods than a low-income person who may only be able to afford a McDonald's burger for a meal. Therefore, the capacity to act lies with the wealthier person. Hence, he or she has more responsibility to mitigate the effects of meat consumption. However, in the end, all people must be held collectively responsible in order to successfully effect change. This means that not only do individuals have a responsibility to stop eating meat, but the government also has the responsibility to stop subsidizing the meat industry, and the meat industry has the responsibility to cease its production of such a detrimental product. Part of the problem is getting people to see that it is indeed a problem. The fact remains that 97% of Americans continue to eat meat, and most see no problem with their actions. Unlike the issues of climate change or poverty, there is no majority consensus that all people should be vegetarians or vegans, even among people who know the impact of meat consumption on the environment. Even with the World Health Organization's recent publication of the negative effects of red meat on human health, few Americans have collectively acted to end meat consumption. In order for this to change, there must be widespread education regarding the meat industry, climate change, and human health. If the issue is framed as one that can be changed with collective action rather than as a drop in the bucket problem, then Americans have the potential capability to drastically improve the state of the planet, as well as to set an example for other countries that are currently developed or developing. If we take action now and combine that action with other footprint reducing practices, we can successfully mitigate climate change and begin to treat animals and the environment ethically. Want to do something but not sure if you're ready to commit to ending your meat consumption full time? Tomorrow, April 22nd, is Earth Day. Join me and go vegan or vegetarian for 24 hours in honor of our planet.